Hello, welcome to the Oral History of Criminology project. We're here today in New Orleans at the meeting of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences in February of 2018. My name is John Hepburn. I'm pleased to interview John Conley about his life, his distinguished career in criminology and criminal justice, and his pivotal role in the creation of the Academy. John, let's begin with the first and the easiest question, and that is discuss a little bit about your academic background. I know you were in the military, the Air Force, in the mid-60s.
Correct.
And then you started college after that?
Correct, in '67.
Okay.
Yeah. Joined the Air Force. Well, I went to night school. I was working for General Motors for 4 years prior to that, after I got out of high school. And they made me go to night school, and I was not interested in college. But I went to night school, didn't do very well. And actually flunked out of 2 colleges in night school. So, you know, it was interesting. And then things developed, and was working for GM at the time. And then I was getting close to the draft in '63. And I didn't want to be drafted, so I looked around anyway. I ended up in the Air Force. And
in the military police?
Of all things, I ended up in the military police. And got stationed. And once I got into the service and had training, and obviously got assigned to a base. I went from security, which was base security in military police, and then pretty quickly made rank and was assigned to town patrol. So I was involved with law enforcement, and my office was actually downtown in the police department. I had 3 guys working with me, so I really got turned on by it, and I started taking classes on campus, on base from the campus at the university there, and. I took a criminology course taught by a ABD from Berkeley, California, who was assigned for that year. And I just got turned on by that whole concept, the whole area of criminology, criminal justice, particularly the process. And one thing led to another. I served my 4 years and applied for criminal justice programs around the country.
So what was the first school you
I went to? I got accepted at a few schools, but I chose Indiana University. Partly, well, it was a good school like all the others, but partly because it was family. Family was in Ohio, and that was close, so we decided to go there. So I went to Indiana University.
And then on for grad degree at Michigan State?
Correct. I got two double majors in Indiana, and then I applied for graduate school. I was convinced by his faculty there to go on because that was the late '60s now, and everything was expanding in criminal justice. Academic programs, monies for law enforcement, so on. And I ended up applying to a number of schools, Michigan State, Washington State, Berkeley, and Berkeley couldn't give me enough money. So I ended up going to Michigan State. They gave me a pretty good deal.
Okay. And you finished your degree in what year?
77.
77, but yet you already were teaching by then.
Right.
Okay.
I did not go the straight path. I've always, for some reason, I've always moved in and out of a trajectory. And so I started at Michigan State, excuse me, received a fellowship from LEA. I had a full fellowship.
What's LEA?
Law Enforcement Administration, Law Enforcement Assistance Administration in the late '60s. All the money was coming through the feds down to universities and also to criminal justice agencies.
That preceded NIJ.
Yeah, it did. And Michigan State had just started a new PhD program, and there was only 10. We were part of the first 10. I was part of the first 10. So I went there, and I got interested in the history of law enforcement and some of the legal issues around the history of criminal justice at Indiana. And when I got to Michigan State, I talked to my advisors and the deans there and with the advisor and so on, and they wouldn't let me cross. I wanted to do criminal justice, obviously, with the Michigan State School of Criminal Justice, but I wanted my second field to be history. And the social science college, which wouldn't let us do that. So I was taking classes in history, graduate level, and so they got upset. So the dean of that college talked to the dean of the other college. They made a big agreement so that I was the first one to be able to cross colleges. So it was kind of interesting. I took, like your second field would be history. So they did that. I liked it. I enjoyed it. But I only stayed there from 70, let's see, 69, 70, 71, 72. And I wasn't getting enough CJ history out of that program because the CJ person, they didn't have one. And I looked around and ended up at Claremont. I applied for Claremont and took the DOJ fellowship with me. They told me I couldn't do that, but when I called DOJ, they said, we don't care as long as you're not changing your focus. So I took that out to Claremont for a year, and I got a fellowship out there as well. But the opportunity was to study under Leonard Levy, who is a renowned historian in America. As a matter of fact, he had just won the Pulitzer Prize for his latest book. But his focus was criminal justice history. He was a legal clerk under, he was a PhD, he was a legal clerk under Frankfurter. And what a scholar and what a teacher. So he became my primary mentor in the field, and I did some research while I was there. But then again, I got this siren call to go back into law enforcement. So I had an opportunity to go down to Dayton. They had a new program, a $500,000 grant to set up a regional academy instead of a local police academy, and the police chief there was very, very supportive of that. A guy I worked with in Michigan State called me up and invited me to come down and help set it up. He was going to be the director, and I became the associate director. And we set up this really unique model for police training. And it was the first in the country, where we basically structured the curriculum like a college, where you could, police officers have so many hours a year they had to take, they had so many hours they had to train, but the fields weren't specified. They had choices, but they were forced into 40 hours, and they didn't like that. They were resisting it, they fought it. So we structured it like a curriculum of college and allowed them to pick and choose in their fields of interest so that they could serve their 40 hours and then they came 60 and so on and so on. And it was quite a hit, quite a big hit. Okay. We got written up in Time magazine. Actually.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So then you left that and went to Tulsa?
Well, what happened was we set the whole thing up, got the infrastructure set up, had the training going on, we had video, television set up, room for television for the training, etc. And the police officers started liking that. And we did that, set it all up, and then the director, the guy that brought me down there, John Angel, got an offer to set up a similar a bachelor's master's degree in the University of Anchorage, and he took the job. That opened it up. It was going to change. Our police chief was retiring. The deputy chief, who was becoming the police chief, offered me the position. And at that point in time, it had been 4 years since I started my PhD program, and I told them flat out, if I don't get back into academia, I'm never going to finish PhD. So I made that decision and ended up taking a job at the University of Tulsa to create a program from scratch, but at the same time get me back into academia. So it was, I had a family, I had to balance those pressures.
So you left ABD but then finished the dissertation while at Tulsa?
I did.
While a faculty member?
Right,
yeah.
I did that.
Not unusual, especially in those days.
No, it was not unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, just quickly, you were at Tulsa for 5 years, and you were the director of the CJ program that you developed.
Yeah, I started the program there. My first hire was Chris Zimmerman.
Okay.
We eventually ended up, it was at Carnegie after us, went to Carnegie University and then to Indiana University, Pennsylvania. And we had a small, very solid program going there.
And when you left there, you went to the University of Wisconsin.
I did.
At Milwaukee.
As a faculty member.
As a faculty member, but later you became at least the acting dean for a couple of years, interim dean.
Well, it was off and on. I was coordinated.
But I'm saying there was administration in your career.
There was administration all the way through because I was there a year, and the dean there said, we got problems in the CJ program, and Carl Pope, that was the one who pushed for me to come there. He was coordinated for a while. He didn't like that kind of stuff. He wanted to get out of it. And so they had someone else running the CJ program. We were developing a master's program, and we weren't respected in basically around the disciplines in the university, which was not uncommon at the time. Partly because we weren't participating in the curriculum of the intro level classes and so on. And so the dean asked me, given my experience there in Tulsa, if I could be interested. Carl pushed me to do that, so I did it. So basically, I set that structure up down there at Michigan State with Carl and with Bill Fire. And we basically eliminated a lot of the part-time instructors we had, and we started getting the funds to hire full-time faculty.
Just a correction, that was at Milwaukee.
I'm sorry, Milwaukee. What did I
Yeah.
say?
Michigan State.
Michigan State. Milwaukee.
Okay. And then from there,
Yep.
after
Yep.
what, a few years, I can look at my notes here.
12.
12 years, you,
Yeah.
you went on to Buffalo.
SUNY Buffalo. Yeah. Actually, I was trying to get back to New England.
Right, I
The
recall
truth
that.
be told, you remember? We had
You're
this
trying to work your way,
conversation. trying to
hopscotch
work-
your way back to Maine.
Yeah, I was trying to work my way back to Maine. And Buffalo opened up, and they had a program there. It was very large, but had very internal problems, weak faculty. But they had new deans come in, and they were starting. So they offered. I went up and interviewed, and got the job, and that was fun. I stayed there 6 years.
And then that trajectory back to Maine suddenly took
Yeah.
a 180.
I took a right turn in Buffalo. A CJ faculty that was in San Bernardino, who I talked to, we all know. Anyway, he in the middle of a major snowstorm in Buffalo, I was working on a Saturday at the campus, and I got a fax come in, and it was from him, and it showed me him and his wife sitting in their hot tub in California, sipping wine in the middle of the afternoon, and we had 14 or 18 inches of snow that day. So he said, "You really should apply for this deanship." So I did. Yeah, it's just one of those things I did. I had applied for deanships before, and always made short lists for CJ and around the country. But I just never wanted. Milwaukee was great for me. It was a great place to be, great faculty. So it was tough to leave unless I had a really good job.
Yeah.
So I ended up in Buffalo to take that to build a program, and then ended up in San Diego.
San Bernardino.
San Bernardino.
Okay. So then you were there for 11 years as dean.
11 years as dean.
Okay. One of the things that becomes apparent just by the way you've already kind of given your biography is that, you know, in addition to being a member of the Academy and of ASC and the Western Criminology Society and others, you're one of the few members of any of those societies who also is a member of the Organization of American Historians, the American Society for Legal History, and the International Association for the History of Crime and Criminal Justice. There aren't many folks who do criminal justice or criminology who also do history.
Correct.
So that kind of puts you in a separate category.
Correct.
Is that good or bad?
Well, it was good personally, because I enjoyed doing that kind of research. It was somewhat tough initially. At the time that I broke into the field and finished my degree and started publishing history journal in history pieces, articles, there was only 2 people in the whole ACJS group that was doing anything in history. It was Sam Walker and me, and so we became buddies during that period of time. And Sam, of course, built a terrific career in that field. But it was very difficult for us to get published in criminology and criminal justice journals. Nobody cared about history. You either had to be a theory or you had to be a statistic person. We could not break through. It took quite a while for that to happen. And so in that sense, staying in the field of criminal justice and criminology was tough for a new scholar, like a beginning scholar, a burgeoning scholar, to break into his field that he really wanted to address. So, but I had joined American Legal History and American History, and the International came later because it came out of a publication I had, which is really almost all European historians in crime and justice. I had joined those legal history societies before I had joined ACJS and ASC, because I was associated with those people while I was working my dissertation, my PhD, and so on, and my influence from Claremont.
Well, there is a kind of a nice linear trend here, because you mentioned the double majors in undergrad.
Right.
You mentioned going off on a hiatus for a year to Claremont,
Right.
leaving Michigan State and
Right.
studying under a famous historian.
Right.
And then when you were finishing up your dissertation while you were in Oklahoma, the title of your dissertation, the topic was?
The history of the Oklahoma penal system.
Right.
from 1900, early on, late 1900s to the, pretty much the last chapter really brings it up to 60s, but
Yeah.
you know, it was lighter. But
And it focuses principally on what? On the history.
Well, the initial interest was the history of the prison in Oklahoma for a couple of reasons. And I wasn't quite sure until I got into it what the theme, what the pressure was, what the point was going to be. But what I ended up being fascinated with was the decision making, the governmental, political decision making, and the policies that develop as a new prison is being built. And in other words, the purpose and mission of that prison wasn't just to house criminals. It was to build businesses. It was to build an infrastructure of a new state. And they used prison labor to do that, and that the convict labor system developed as well. I mean, it was nationwide, but nobody was covering it in the writing. All the writing in the history of prisons was written about two prisons, right? Pennsylvania and Auburn. Right. The work model and the reformative religious model. Right. And so I wanted to see what happened on the, halfway across the country at around the turn of the century, because that's when that period of debate was being, and the states west of the Mississippi were focused on more pragmatic and/or corrupt uses of prison and prison labor. It wasn't for reformative purposes. Right. Okay. And then I covered some violence in those studies as well.
Well, I noticed in looking over your CV that you include articles pertaining to prison industries and labor, to prison reform, to the economic origins of prisons. Right. So kind of a pretty consistent line of tracking there in terms of the economic, political, reformative issue tied together.
Right, right. Yep.
And then
I had a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
The second area, I guess, of my research was the legal history kind of. I had a couple. The one paper I wrote that got published in the British Journal of Legal History was on the colonial justice of the peace, and that was a study that I did tracking the influence of the justice of the peace manuals, which were very popular and necessary in England, over to the colonial period, and how much of that British law was carried over, and what laws were modified by American colonial justice peace. And that integration of the two legal systems is very critical to understanding the philosophy behind our Bill of Rights and that. So, but I looked at it at the justice peace level, which was the local level. It was the first office of every town that was created during the colonial period. The first office they created among their community was the justice of the peace, and it had a wide authority. But it was critical because they all used those manuals. They were written by different people in England, different legal specialists, and they had different slants, and the different states used different models. So it was kind of interesting. I tracked that all the way down the seaboard and then wrote an article about it, all the way from New England down through the southern colonies. It was very detailed. I ended up spending days and hours and months in the what do you call it, the museum in, I just lost the name, the Hunting Museum in the library in California. Okay. And the only reason I got in there, because it's all documents that are
protected?
Yeah, very, very specialized. And the only reason I got in there was because Leonard Levy, Professor Levy, vouched for me. And you had to wear gloves, and it was really a fascinating thing. But I was reading original documents from. Yeah, that's fascinating. For me, it was a fascinating period, and I wrote that piece for. Got it published in British.
One of the other, continuing on with the history, one of your other focal areas has been policing.
Yes. Was
this simply an outburst of interest based on your time in the military as a military police, or was this something else or a colleague that kind of moved you into this direction?
I think it was to put a humorous element on. I think it was as a kid that a lot of kids like to be the fireman or policeman. I always wanted to be a policeman as a kid. Turned out I had uncles that were policemen and so on. And then of course I got away from that and never went into law enforcement. But my original goal of graduating from, coming out of the military and getting my degree at Indiana was to go back into policing. Or into civil policing. I had already been accepted in Cleveland, and I had already been accepted in LA. My wife at the time and I weren't quite sure where we wanted to live, so I applied for both, and I got accepted. But finishing my degree at Indiana, the faculty down there was influencing me to consider going on to graduate school. So I took a turn, but I always had that interest in policing. And when I got to Michigan State, that interest was sort of continued because as a TA, a couple of us were hired because they were doing a lot of police organizational studies. And that kind of tracked me into it. So I always kind of kept my foot in one or the other, but I don't think I would consider myself on my writing. There were pieces that were published that were fine, but they weren't something that was going to have a major impact on the field.
Okay.
But I always kept my foot in. That's the problem, I think. If I look back on my career, one of the problems I think I had was I couldn't decide one way or the other how deep I wanted to go into either one of those two fields. But I always kept my feet. I ended up doing a lot of consulting in law enforcement.
I was going to say, interesting that you would say that about your focus in policing because of the previous background you had at Dayton.
Correct.
Setting up the police training academy. Michigan State was at that time well known as a
law enforcement
policing specialty PhD program.
Exactly.
It still is at this point, but it was heavily
less so.
then. I don't mean that disparaging him.
No.
The focus was there. Yeah. And then...
Well, if I may interrupt, that reputation was accurate. And it was because Michigan State was the largest in the country. And it had a master's degree, and the bulk of the people that came out of those master's degrees went into federal government law enforcement jobs and ended up being mostly the directors of all of the major alphabet agencies. So they had that law enforcement connection, and they also had an international connection, particularly in Asia, which speaks for itself.
Okay.
At the time. Right?
But then
they would open up the PhD. It was still narrowly focused. The faculty they had a couple of three strong academics.
Jack Green there then?
Jack Green came in right after I left. Yeah.
Okay.
Jack Green was the beginning of probably the movement towards a much more academic oriented.
Okay.
They had John McNamara and Lou Randolette, which was in the community policing and stuff like that. But they weren't, except for McNamara, they weren't big scholars. And so we were the first 10. We came out. There was only 4 of us that finished, but it still continued.
Right.
But it broadened out after the change of leadership in the program.
And then after that, much more recently, you served on a number of performance evaluations for local police departments.
Yes, I did.
You'd come in as a part of a site inspection team or whatever to evaluate.
Yes, most of the time it was a site.
Smaller town police departments?
I preferred to go into smaller town. Jack Green and I've had a conversation about this because Jack did a lot of that too, as well as the academic research he does. But in large departments. But I wasn't going in. I didn't feel I was trained well enough as a researcher to measure the kinds of things that some of the progressive police departments were trying at the time. Because I didn't have I had statistics in my graduate work and all that, but I wasn't statistically oriented. Wasn't my interest. I liked writing history, but I did have views about policing. So, but I kind of liked. I guess it's because I came out of a small town. I kind of like my uncles and what family I had in policing were in small town policing, and they were always frustrated not being able to stay on top of things. So I kind of oriented myself to opportunities to do. Consulting at smaller, medium-sized departments, 200 or less. Larger departments would be 2 or 3 people. I did a lot of work in Massachusetts and Fall River and places like that, Somerset, and did a lot of restructuring and building up an infrastructure. They were using state funds matched by federal and stuff like that. And I found that challenging, interesting, and it was different than the historical.
But you were being brought in as an outside expert.
That's correct.
Right. Sometimes when you're on the outside, of course, there's a difference.
Right.
On the other hand, you're still the outsider, and they may decide they don't want to listen to or agree to what it is you're. I mean, did you feel that you actually were able to make a difference by going through this exercise?
In some places, yes. In other places, it was a total waste of time. And sometimes, like in Massachusetts, at one point I had myself and an FBI agent, former FBI agent who was finishing his PhD, and I had another gentleman from business management school who came out of the law enforcement family and was very interested in that. And we went into the city, and I won't name the city, but we went into the city, fairly large city, to help them restructure their whole organization in terms of the way they distributed the command structure, the operational level, and so on. And it was a 2-month project, off and on, we were visiting, of course, and spending 3-4 days. And about halfway through, I found out from from one of the senior police officers that the only reason they agreed to have us come in was because we were the carrot, because they wanted what would go along would come in with us as the carrot, I should say, was a whole new communication system paid for by the state. So we were there fighting, encouraging, in a department that had clear political half and half, just fighting each other all the time. It wouldn't change much. It was cultural, it was local, and it wasn't going to change. It wasn't going to move to progressive very fast. And so
organizational change is a challenge.
It's a challenge. You
Yeah.
try to deal the best you can, but in the smaller departments, some of the smaller departments, we did have impact on.
What about later, or not later, but in a different role? I noticed that at each of the 4 universities where you worked, from Tulsa to Milwaukee, Buffalo, and lastly at San Bernardino,
Right.
in each of those you were on either a mayor's commission or council or some governmental agency's commission or council,
Correct.
which would give you more legitimacy locally than being the outside expert.
Yes.
In each of these cases, you're dealing with police operations.
Except Oklahoma, which was corrections.
Corrections, okay.
I was appointed to the board of the new reform governor came in and shook things up a little bit in Oklahoma. Ended up being Senator Boren from Oklahoma, and he wanted new blood, along with Oklahoma's a very political state, and he wanted some new blood. So he appointed various people, and I was asked to join the Oklahoma Crime Commission, which you may remember was part of the requirement of receiving LEA funds. You had to have a crime commission. They had to be the managing policy board, and so on and so on. So he asked me to put on, and I was on the Oklahoma Crime Commission, and I, through that, visited the prison, and it ended up being my dissertation. But
Okay.
so that was the only one. The other time was mostly police. I was invited to serve on white paper research groups.
Did it have any more impact than outside evaluator coming in as a technical assistant?
In Buffalo it did, but only for a short time, because in Buffalo, again, a reform mayor came in after a long-term mayor, and he came out of the state legislature, local guy, and he was a basketball hero, so he made it in as the new mayor. Set up his transition team, and I was asked to join that because of comments I had made in the press and so on, and just people knowing me around the city, just for my being involved, including in the police, with police officers, in a more informal way, plus the program. And they had a pretty difficult department to change because everything was internal, and he asked me to conduct some kind of basically called a white paper, I guess. It was just, to advise the new mayor about, and they had various people there was 10 of us. They all had a different section of the city. He was Democrat, but they had the group I worked with combined of Democrat and Republican leaders, and we all had a responsibility. I did the police department, and the issue I found is that none of the police officers, senior officers, from lieutenant on up, were supported by the department to improve in their career, the educational piece of their career, the training piece of their career, except they got a promotion and a pay raise. That was it. So you go up through the chain of command, up through captain and deputy chiefs. Nobody had been sent out of town for a training session. Nobody had been sent to the FBI executive training program, which is the entry the entry to big city police job. So when the mayor met with us and he asked us all of our opinions, anyway, the bottom line was, he said, "What's your opinion?" I said, "Well, how much do you want to change the department?" He said, "We got to change this department. We got to move it into we got to move it forward," is what he said. And I said, well, you can't move it forward with the people you have inside. He said, well, what do you suggest? I said, the only way you're going to have an opportunity to move it forward is to hire an outside chief, because that is what's happening in the field. And he said, can you help me with that? And I said, yeah. So I ended up working with, actually I came up with a few names of my own, but I worked with Pat Murphy. I don't know if you remember Pat Murphy. And I worked with him. He gave me a few names. I called these people, worked hard to get them interested in coming up to Buffalo. And we ended up, he ended up hiring Gil Kulikowski.
Just for the record, who was Pat Murphy?
Pat Murphy was former police commissioner of NYPD.
Okay.
And was working in the field, as you will
Right.
know, around the country as consultants and so on, but he was also working with the NYPD, with new commissioners as they came in.
Okay.
So anyway, Gil Kulikowski came in, and he was the first external police commissioner in the history of Buffalo. He lasted 6 years, changed a lot, supported his people, sent them off to schools and all that kind of stuff. And then they had the problems in Seattle with that economic summit that they had there, and they had the riots and so on. Anyway, the city council there decided to change chiefs, and he ended up going out there. But what was interesting to me, I had left by then, but I contacted the city. And what was interesting, he made a lot of changes, a lot of good things happened. Public ratings in the police department went up, et cetera, et cetera. And then within 2 years after him going, we reverted right back to Buffalo-style policing.
Did they?
You know, it just, the infrastructure, it just wasn't long enough to break the culture.
Well, speaking of the culture, let's talk about something else. In 1990,
Uh-oh.
yeah, in 1990 you received the ACJS Founders Award.
Correct.
Why did they feel you deserved a Founders Award?
I have no idea.
That's a short conversation.
I have no idea.
Well, let's go back in history a little bit, then maybe I can refresh your memory. What was your first involvement with ACJS? How's that? The Academy.
I got involved. I joined in, I think, 77, something like 75, 76, something like that. I think I went to my first meeting in 76. But anyway, and I joined the Academy then. And at the 76, it was Atlanta meeting, I'm not sure now, get cloudy on the dates. But there was a pretty big scandal in the Academy at the time with one of the officers of the board. And it was a typical board, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and then one or two others. Anyway, the bottom line was, and this is, it seems to me, a pivotal point in the Academy, not because of the scandal itself, but because of the timing of the scandal and what was happening in the field with new incoming academics into the CJ and into ASC. And it pretty much, the old guard was kind of like letting that scandal go. It was basically an embezzlement issue of membership funds. And at that meeting, a number of us stood up, brand new whippersnappers, stood up and said, wait a minute, what do you mean? You embezzle money and we're in criminal justice and you're just going to let it go? No. You've got to be some justice here somewhere. And there was half a dozen people that stood up, including me. Anyway, so that we got known as loudmouths, if nothing else. But what was happening as the field? So anyway, that at that point, I became more involved. Gordon Meisner was asked to come in and take over as the president again that year, rather than go through an election. It was a voice vote, and everybody agreed, so that they could start cleaning, the board. And it's not that they were anyway. So Gordon Meisner asked some younger folks if they wanted to participate in various roles in the academy. And he asked me to be if I'd be interested in program chair, because I was pretty critical about the quality of the sessions, and they weren't very many. There were 20 or 25 at most. And
this is the very early years.
This is 77, 75, 76.
Right.
And I said, no, I can't do that.
But I mean, ACJS was an infant at that point in time.
Very young. And I don't know what the membership was, but somebody had to check the accuracy of the data there, but I doubt if we had 200 people. And it was very infancy. And Gordon was very big in ASC and so on, but he was also supportive of the AACJS. Anyway, I don't want to make this too long here, but I said I couldn't do it that year because I was finishing my dissertation. And he said, okay, how about next year? So the bottom line is I ended up being program chair in for the New Orleans meeting in '79. Okay. And Bob Culbertson came in as president at the beginning of the previous year and that year, I think. And as secretary treasurer, I'm sorry, and then president. So he was on the board for quite some time. And then I took over and I ran, but I said, look, I'm not gonna just, I said, if you want me to be program chair, we're gonna start having standards. They're gonna have to have papers, and they're gonna have to be academic papers, and they're gonna have to be there to present. Mm-hmm. You know, and I made it very clear that we were gonna reject people. And he said, go for it. So Chris Zimmerman and I, working in Tulsa, basically put that panel together. The other thing was, I had been to a number of the History Association meetings and presented papers there, and the standards and the protocols were very, very strict, I guess you call it. Yeah, very rigorous. And so we tried to infuse that idea through that program. But I also reached out, I sent copies of the call for papers to every of the major associations, including some out to the international. And we got a lot of people. We got political scientists, we got historians who do history and CJ and so on. We got quite a few. We had probably 60 people. I'd say 50, 60, 50. I know we had 10 from overseas that came into New Orleans. And they, it was a new opening for them. And then Culbertson had sent the applications all across the state of Louisiana and some in the region because he had a printing budget that nobody's paying attention to, apparently. He makes fun of that. But they were sent out, and that got a lot of local people, more so than normal, from the disciplines. So when we ended up putting a program together, we had 100 panels, and we probably had 500 or 600 people at that conference. That was the largest conference at that time, and from then on it grew. Yeah. So it was a model that I set up, and then the following couple of years or so, 80, I forget the year now.
79 through 82?
82, I was on the board.
You're a trustee.
A trustee, which is a trustee at large. Which I said, all right, elect me at large. I don't want to be president, but elect me at large. That gives me more leverage because I've gotten votes from all over the country, not just from a region, you know. And I said, yeah, do that, and I'll make noise. So we did that, and then the board was very concerned and interested about expanding the academy. At the time, there was a conflict, an organizational conflict probably, and somewhat of a discipline conflict between ASC and ACJS. Some people were saying we ought to join at the time. That was very, very loose.
You mean unite?
Yeah, it was very loose conversation. But people like my generation, our generation of new PhDs were coming in, and we joined both organizations. Maybe we'd be more powerful, would have an impact, policy-wise and so on, if we were a larger organization. So anyway, there was that discussion going on. My interest at the time was that we had the Journal of Criminal Justice affiliated with ACJS, but it was independent. It was run by an individual who was from Indiana University faculty and then went up to Ann Arbor as a traffic institute up there. And then it was published by a private publisher. And it was a good journal, but it wasn't, we didn't have editorial control. And that became an issue. So when the contract came up, a number of us were arguing that we should develop our own journal. And I chaired a committee on that. And as Dick Bennett just reminded us, he was on the committee, and Jack Green was there as well. I came in later. And we were pushing for, we didn't mind staying with Journal of Criminal Justice, but we wanted that publisher to agree that we would be the editorial board with our own editor, and we'd go through the process of editorial selection at ASC and every other academic. and they resisted that. And it was all about money. It was all about an individual. And so we didn't renew the contract. So we said we're going to have to get our own journal. And so we started building it's all the background work you have to do. You have to build up the structure, you have to build up the electoral process, you have to build up the standards and the criteria for the editor, deputy editor, what the board would look like, how they would get selected, the process that would be there. And I did most of that grunt work. I had that, well, I've been involved with other age organizations. I saw how they ran theirs. And so I basically served as a conduit for that kind of a model structure, and then brought it to the committee, and we all looked at it. We kept fine-tuning it, proposed it, and then finally we proposed it, and it was tough because we were our own publisher. And we had to rely on some university to help us.
You say which meant financial liabilities.
Yes, we had, perfect. But we all decided, a committee decided, and we pushed the board in that direction, that if we were going to start a journal, it was going to be a quality journal, and we were going to go for quality. And if we didn't make it, we didn't make it. But if we weren't going to try to soften it and then build into quality, because then the other pressure point for us was that there was a large contingent of retired FBI, urban police administrators, captains, whatever, who were teaching in community colleges and in some of the four-year colleges at the time. You may remember that. When the money came down from Washington to the university, they hired like crazy. But they hired local people to teach, and then they became faculty. They weren't academics. They were, fine for the jobs, but they weren't academics. They wanted a police journal, and we had to fight that. We had to resist that. And there was a little conflict there for quite a while. But the committee held together, and if you know Jack Green and Dick Bennett and a couple others, pretty strong people, and we continued to argue that way. And we won that battle, if you will. And the journal turned out to be a fine journal.
What's the journal?
Justice Quarterly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You left that detail out.
Justice Quarterly.
And who was the first editor?
Rita Simon. Yeah.
And she had just finished being editor of American Sociological Review.
She was, yes.
So she certainly brought some standards with her.
Right, and we were pleased that she was willing to do that. She believed in what we were doing. She thought it was important. And she was very good, and she set up Jim Fife was deputy editor. She set up a very strong editorial board, and luckily we survived the publishing area, and we ended up, it ended up stabilizing.
So that ended all the problems within the academy after you were there to solve that?
Well, I mean, it was a big one. The other one that I worked on was just the way we were electing our people. It was all good old boy structure, in the past. And I mean, a good old boy structure. It was friends, new friends, and they all became presidents and whatever. And so I took, again, I relied on my experience from the other associations and looked at how they managed and elected and built in a structure that was, it was all organizational scrap work. Right. But I did that alone. I mean, I did that because I wanted to, and the board said, well, why don't you write up some models and we can look at them. So I basically wrote up the infrastructure. So they were kind of, I think that's part of the reason that eventually they said, he really did some work here, maybe we give him a Founders Award. I don't know, you have to ask the board later. But, and then the other thing I got interested in with the Academy was getting some additional scholarly instruments to help stabilize the academic orientation. And so I came up with an idea, and I proposed this. I was just getting off the board, I think, at the time. I proposed to set up a book series in, I believe, '79. And so it would be a book of edited books that would come out. We tried to get new scholars, younger scholars, as well as established scholars to edit them. And we got that off the ground. Anderson was interested, so they published it. And I think we got, last I remember, when I left that whole process, I think we had 10 volumes out, one a year. So, okay. Yeah. So anyway, I tried to set something up that would be ongoing. It was more like a current. The pieces in the journals, if you look at those books, the pieces were written by people who had published pretty extensively in the field of their specialty, and they were writing something that was evaluative about where that was at the point in time. So it was kind of, we figured it would be useful in classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I have on my notes, of course, was that 10 years ago, or actually almost 12 now, in 2006, you were placed on the Wall of Fame
Yes.
at Michigan State University.
Right.
What made them think you were deserving of the Wall of Fame? I didn't say shame.
I know.
It's fame.
I know.
Okay.
Some of my best friends called it the Wall of Shame as soon as they found out. And one of my best colleagues, who was sitting on this couch with me, I think said that as well. But it was designed to recognize criminal justice alumni who had contributed to their fields in various ways. It included professionalism in terms of agencies, etc. It included academics. It included people involved with policy institutes. Had Michigan State has a big international student alumni, and it included some of those people who were ministers of their countries and so on. So it came out of that, and somebody had put me up, recommended my name without me knowing about it, and then I got a call and told me that I'd made it. So I went in, and they said nice things about me, and I appreciated the recognition. And when I was at Michigan State as a student, I was quite a thorn in the side of that administration, because they were trying to make all of us into their model, the top leadership, into their model, and a lot of us wanted to break out and become academics and do research.
Or historians.
Or historians or whatever, but it was a lot of top-down control, and the students just happened that the bunch of students that were there at that time.
It was the 60s.
Masters, it was the 60s, we had the 68 riots in Chicago the year before I got there. And so we were pretty vocal about it, and a couple of faculty in my personal life, a couple of personal career part of my life, took umbrage at my leadership, even though I was among 3 or 4 of that kind of movement in the
Right.
department, and made my time at Michigan State pretty miserable. Actually, one of them tried to block me from. I had to reapply because my time ran out just as I was getting to the station. So he tried to block me to get it, but turned out that may be too personal, but it didn't work. And I think
Happily ever after, yeah.
the academy work, some of my history work was known, and also the practical. I was kind of somewhat unique, because I had a lot of practical stuff as well.
Yeah.
And so that's what they said, and they said nice things about me, and I took it, enjoyed it, and it was a nice night, and I felt honored. I really was honored.
Oh, good. You deserved it.
Thanks.
I think I'm done. Are you feel done?
I-
You have anything else you want to say?
No, I think I've already said too much already.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to stand up in the back and say, no, that's false.
Yeah, right.
Fake news.
Hey, this is history. It can be interpreted.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah?
All right.
There we go.
Do business, next door.